What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Bro History. It's Henry Zamota and Danny Adeljabar. What's up, brother? How are you?
Chilling, man, as per usual. How about yourself?
I can't complain. It is 10:25 p.m. on Thursday, the 10th, I think, of June. So this episode will be released probably on Sunday. So if something crazy happens between now and then, sorry we couldn't cover it, but we're talking about China today.
China.
Changing course. Well, actually, we were talking about China, 2 months ago or so?
Yep. Yeah, not too long ago. Maybe we can consider this as part of as part of the collection. I do wish that you'd be able to, like, group things together. Like, on YouTube, how you can make, like, these collections of videos and stuff.
Playlist.
I wish you could do that with our podcasts. Yeah, that'd be cool.
Or tag it.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Unfortunately,
that's not a thing.
Yeah, Apple Podcasts is not that sophisticated.
There are no podcasts that do that, to my understanding. So you can't do it anywhere.
Something that we missed, and it was a big news story around the same time as everything that was going on with Gaza. And it wasn't a huge news story because it wasn't that big of a deal, but it was still very odd when this happened.
Noteworthy.
It was noteworthy. It was telling. And it was that John Cena video. You know what I'm talking about, right?
John Cena.
John Cena.
I have just one question for you. Are you ready?
Am I ready for what? Who's this?
Are you ready for this Sunday night when WWE Champ John Cena defends his title in the WWE Super Slam? Right now, you can order this awesome pay-per-view event for just $59.99.
I'm sorry, no, there is not any chance in hell that we're ever going to have wrestling in this house again. But thank you, but no. Have a good day. Hello?
And goodbye to anyone standing in John Cena's way when he takes on 6 men in a steel cage shoot.
No, it was a different John Cena video. Way less funny, way less.
It was still pretty funny, but it was. I found it humorous.
It was a little sad.
I found it humorous in a very kind of dark way. But I mean, I'm sure most of you guys have listened to it or heard about it at the very least. John Cena is apologizing in Chinese because he called Taiwan a country.
That's right.
And the reason why he did that is because I forget even the context of when he called.
So he was talking to a Taiwanese reporter about the new Fast and Furious movie, and he was just like, I think it said something to the tune of like, "Oh, Taiwan's going to be one of the first countries that can actually see the new Fast and Furious movie." That was it. It was just like, one sentence where he just happened to mention that Taiwan is a country, and obviously that didn't sit well with his Chinese overlords. Actually, fun fact about John Cena that's pretty interesting. He's very active in Chinese social media, so Weibo, and he's been learning Mandarin. And I don't speak Mandarin, so I don't know how good he is, but it sounds pretty good to me. So props for him on that. But as you probably already have guessed, China and Hollywood have been kind of buddy over the last several years, and he's promoting this big movie. The Fast and Furious franchise has been around forever, and somehow they keep making money on them. And there are obviously large Chinese interests in that, because they stand to make a shit ton of money in China. And if John Cena mouths off about how Taiwan is a country, China could very easily be like, nope, we're not allowing this movie in China anymore. And you'll lose money. So I think part of it was probably pressure from the U.S. film studios. I think it's Universal Pictures is what does Fast and Furious. So some execs over there probably pressured him into it, and he's got a fairly big fan base in China. So I'm sure he was conscious of the fact that he maybe offended somebody in that way. But it's like the least offensive thing he could have said about this particular issue, which is just kind of wild and sad.
I know it is kind concerning, to say the least. When that much money is on the line, though, who knows how you would react or what you would do if you're promoting a movie that's probably going to do what? I don't know how much movie.
I think they did 100. I think the last movie they did made like 175 million in China. So
in China alone. Okay.
So it's not an insignificant amount of money,
Yeah. It's a huge market, so it's easy for us to be like, yeah, we would never apologize.
Yeah, I'd stand up for Taiwan.
$20 million? Yeah, I'm sorry about that. Didn't mean to call Taiwan a country. They're not a country at all. I don't know what the hell I was talking about.
Yep.
It is concerning, though, because it's embarrassing. It is it's a very embarrassing thing to get wrapped up in.
Especially because John Cena as a character, not like the human being, but like John Cena the character is like this all American, like brawny, muscly dude, tough guy, WWE superstar. If I'm not mistaken, wasn't he a part of the military at one point? Like this whole persona that he has, right? And then suddenly he's in this like real big dude bro movie series that makes lots of money, and he slips up and says literally one sentence that could piss off China, and suddenly he's got his tail between his legs. Like, that's symbolically kind of sad.
Yeah, like your macho man is like brought down to his knees. Didn't he play in a movie called, like, wasn't his first movie out of wrestling called like The Marine or something like that, where he plays some badass soldier?
Yeah, so he's always typecast in those roles.
Yeah, well, it is concerning to see that influence. There's other cases like that as well.
Sure.
What was that movie called? Was it Red Dawn, the one with Gerard Butler?
Oh yeah, I think so. Mm-hmm.
Something Dawn Down, whatever the hell it was called. It was with Gerard Butler, and it was a film about. Well, initially the film was about China taking over the United States, and when it came to production, when they were going to release this film, they had to change the enemy to North Korea. So instead of like Chinese flags being draped about, they had to use a North Korean flag because they didn't want to piss off the Chinese.
Fun fact about that, again, coming back to the Chinese and Hollywood connection there, any film that's has a substantial, or even any, I think, Chinese investment, because keep in mind this is a communist country, the film cannot have China in a negative military role. Like, they can't be placed in that role negatively. Like, you can make a film where the Chinese military is the good guy. That's totally fine. But you can't make the film in such a way where the Chinese military is depicted negatively at all. Otherwise, you can't get the money from Chinese investors. It's just the way that it works. And if you want to open your, if you want to open up, if you're Disney, as an example, and you want to open up, the next Marvel movie in China, because you stand to make a lot of money there, because they got a lot of consumers and their middle class is growing, and you want to play your movie there, you got to play ball.
You can't put Winnie the Pooh in it.
No. Or Peppa the Pig.
Or Peppy the Pig, is he banned too?
I believe it's a she, but yes. I don't know. I don't watch that shit.
All right. Well, Taiwan is a country. It clearly is a country. They have their own government. They elect their own politicians. They have their own military.
It's physically separate from the mainland.
Very natural borders.
Right.
As in, there's about almost 100 miles of water between Taiwan and the mainland. But it's clearly a country, despite only, I think, about 20 different states across the world recognize it. I know it's not even like a very impressive list of states. It's not major
I feel like
states.
Palestine has more. Palestine has more people backing it than Taiwan does.
Well, I wouldn't say that, because the United States backs Taiwan. However, I think this requires...
I meant number of countries that recognize.
Number of countries.
Yeah.
Well, I think this requires some background, because here's the new... Well, this has been the story for a while now, and I wanted to dive into this today. The prospect of China invading Taiwan, and what would be first and foremost, the likelihood that China would do such a thing. Secondly, would they succeed? And then third, I want to discuss, could the United States even do anything about it if they wanted to? If it's even remotely doubtful, should we do anything about that? So I think that would be a good topic to explore right now, because I think Lloyd Austin today, he said something to Congress where we need to concentrate on China. There's been a bunch of articles coming out, a bunch of think tank pieces coming out, evaluating like the U.S. military versus the Chinese military. So I think it's worth tackling that, and honestly, I think we should be giving some background as well to what exactly it is, like what the history is behind this, because I don't think most people know. At the end of the Chinese Civil War, so the war between Mao and the Chinese communists versus the Kuomintang, the nationalists, Mao's forces won. The CCP took control of China. So Chiang Kai-shek, the president of the Republic of China, what he did is he fled the mainland and then he moved the government to Taiwan.
Right.
So about 100 miles off the coast of China. I think it's 81 miles apart at its closest point. And after they fled, the U.S. recognized Chiang Kai-shek. They recognized his government, the Republic of China. That was
the original republic, right?
The original Republic of China, stationed in Taiwan as like the real government of China.
Right. And the PRC was just like basically holdovers. They were just squatting.
Yeah, exactly.
In China.
Because they were communist. And, the United States had a military conflict with them and during the Korean War. Well, that changes in the 1970s, in the late 70s, right, when the U.S. ultimately changes their policy. They started to recognize the PRC, and then they de-recognized the ROC, so the Republic of China, in 1979. However, the U.S. never went out and recognized China's sovereignty over Taiwan. So they just recognized the
mainland,
communist
right,
China as China, and then Taiwan had kind of was kind of just brushed to the side, or just wasn't really spoken about.
It's an afterthought, basically.
An afterthought. So to this day, the one China policy stands, where the U.S. just recognizes one China. So there's not two Chinas, even though, one is, there's China in both of their names, the People's Republic of China and the Republic of China. The U.S. just said, okay, there's the People's Republic of China, and that's China. That's it. The other thing is just, this weird island, Taiwan, that, we back militarily. For some reason.
That we sell arms to, right?
So what's interesting, though, is that the U.S. has a formal relationship with the PRC and an unofficial relationship with Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And, the way that they were able to get around this is that during the Carter administration, they passed this act called the Taiwan Relations Act. It gave the U.S. the legal means to continue relations with Taiwan, including selling weapons. So it was just a bill that just said, hey, even though that China, we don't recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation, in order for peace and stability and whatever the hell they put in those bills, we still need to have economic ties and, treat them exactly like how we treat every other country. Just a weird political thing at the end of the day. Who
it's kind of like speaking out of both sides of your mouth, though, because on the one hand they were saying, yeah, China's a thing. We won China. Also, we're going to sell weapons to Taiwan.
Yeah, I know.
It's kind of weird.
Well, where the conflict comes in, or the conflict potentially drawing the U.S. in, is the Mutual Defense Treaty between the U.S. and the ROC was terminated after the recognition of the PRC. So the termination of the treaty ended the obligation that the U.S. needed to provide any type of military support or security to Taiwan in the case of them being attacked by China. That would be their main threat out there in the Pacific Ocean. And, since the return of Hong Kong to China in 1997, Taiwan remains one of the few territories that the CCP claims, but they don't actually control. And
do they control Macau? Macau was to Portugal like Britain was to Hong Kong, basically.
Yeah. I don't know the level of control that Beijing has over Macau. I know that there's some degree of autonomy when it comes to the gambling, because basically it's just like Las Vegas of China, right?
Officially, I think it's running as an independent city-state mostly, but it's definitely under China for sure.
So I was saying before, there's all these different studies that have been coming out about China and evaluating the the current political situation. What does China want? What's China's view on Taiwan right now? And I grabbed this from the Center for Strategic International Studies, and we've used them as a source before. We've used them as a source when we were talking about left-wing and right-wing domestic terrorism, so why not use them as a source here? It is widely viewed by Chinese on the mainland as the last vestige of the century of humiliation that began with the Opium Wars in the middle of the 19th century. The persisting separation of the mainland and Taiwan is also portrayed as a hindrance to China's reemergence as a great power, which President Xi Jinping has dubbed the Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. The Chinese Communist Party's legitimacy is linked to his pledge to achieve reunification of Taiwan with the motherland. As commonly held view on the mainland is that no Chinese leader could remain in power if he allowed Taiwan to separate from the PRC and be recognized by the international community as an independent sovereign state. The anti-succession law adopted by Beijing in 2005 sets forth 3 conditions under which China would be justified in using non-peaceful means and other necessary measures to protect China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. 1 would be Taiwan independence forces cause Taiwan's secession from China. 2, major incidents entailing Taiwan's secession from China occur. Or 3, and here's the important one that I think we should focus on, possibilities for peaceful reunification are completely exhausted, which I think that would be the pretext of an invasion of Taiwan would be under, because
that they no longer believe that they can reunify under peaceful pretexts.
And over the past 70 years, there's always been tension between China and Taiwan, but there hasn't been any violence. There's been some time. There's been a couple of times where there was some flexing going on, but there had never been
flexing.
Yeah,
that happens all the time. Actually,
yeah.
China actually pretty recently flew like a bunch of bombers and shit into the Taiwanese identification airspace, just as a quote military exercise. They do that all the time, though.
Yeah, they do that all the time. I mean,
that is a particularly big incursion. That means you're going into their airspace. That's people who aren't of calm mind might take that as a threat and actually open fire, and that could actually start a war. So it's actually pretty dangerous that China would decide to incur on that airspace. But from China's opinion, that is their airspace. So that's kind of the running topic. I still think it's dangerous though.
No, it's definitely not smart. It's not maybe it's smart in terms of what the Chinese think tankers want, but it definitely sounds like a potential conflict could happen. And it's interesting that China was pursuing a policy of peaceful reunification, but they were using things like economic benefits and things like that. For instance, both countries have strong relations. So this is something that's never really mentioned in all these different papers that are coming out about, the imminent threat of war right now.
Right.
China is Taiwan's largest trading partner, and Taiwan is China's 10th largest trading partner. So they have heavy.
That's actually pretty
economic
That's
ties.
impressive. That's impressive because I didn't know that until just recently either. That like China does a lot of trade. I mean, their 10th largest partner is Taiwan. That's impressive, and I learned by
It's like
doing
2%.
research
It's like
on
2% of their trade is with Taiwan, which is
it's
significant
huge.
for a country that has like 30 million people. Taiwan's
Right.
small. It's not compared to China. The population.
Their output is incredible. Yeah, no, that part is pretty interesting, and the fact that I think that's probably the reason why there hasn't been any like major violence is because of how closely economically tied they are to one another. Like, yeah, it's only their 10th largest trading partner, but China's not trying to risk that either. China's smarter than that. They want to make money.
Yeah, and also they're at risk of ruining other trade relationships as far as like an international backlash.
Yeah.
It's not profitable for them to. This would be a total nationalist policy. Some analysts are talking about how China wants to take control of their chip because Taiwan manufactures a lot of like semiconductors and stuff like that. So they want to take control of that industry or those industries. But I don't know. I don't necessarily find too much water into that. I think a lot of this is, I think there definitely is this nationalist sentiment in China to reclaim their territory. And the reason why I think that is because there's always been, going back to the fall of the Qing dynasty, when, the People's Republic of China, ironically enough, embarked on a plan to reunify all of China from the different warlords that divvied up the country after
The
World
fall
War
of the
I.
Qing dynasty.
So yeah, I can believe that is a part of the ethos right now in China. However, the economic reality, I don't see them taking that big of a gamble.
You don't, but if you read the media these days, you feel like they are, and I think a lot of what's going on is like Xi, getting like taking more aggressive stances in like open forums, right? On this issue of sovereignty, and obviously they have a ton of different reasons for this. It's Chinese nationalism, like talk about piggybacking off of our series of like the creation of the Chinese state. It is on the rise. Like there is a burgeoning middle class. They're coming into their own in that respect, and they're also investing heavily in their military. So you put all these elements together, and then you get like a rise of Chinese nationalism. So the natural offshoot of that is to look to all the territory that they believe that is in this Chinese sphere of influence that they believe is theirs, and that's obviously Hong Kong, Macau. Definitely, we already know that those two are firmly within Chinese grasp. But the ones that are still kind of outliers are places like Taiwan, or the islands in the South China Sea that everyone fights over. So those are all just natural occurrences from this rise of Chinese nationalism.
And another big thing to add to that is they have a modern military now.
Yeah.
So there is a possibility that they could pull this off, that they would be able to conquer Taiwan and complete the reunification of China. I don't even know. Was Taiwan part of any major dynasty, Chinese dynasty, or what dynasty was Taiwan, the island of Taiwan part of?
It must have been. It must have. Like, I don't recall this from our like ancient Chinese studies. I don't recall this explicitly, but it must have been if that's what is in the national ethos that Taiwan is a part of China. It wasn't like an empty island that nobody lived in. You know what I mean? Like the ROC didn't just like escape to like oh look, we found this giant island that no one lives on, and that's where we're gonna go and escape. No, I mean there were people there.
And that's what Israel is.
Let's not open up that can of worms again. But yeah, I mean I think having a military now definitely it entices the hawks, and I think that's probably true of every country. Once you start, acquiring certain military assets, you think you can use them.
Well, you have to take in mind that the PRC was incredibly poor for a very large part of its history. It's still very, very poor in a lot of parts in China, especially in Western China.
I mean, if you average their GDP across all of their people, it doesn't look great per capita.
No, it doesn't. But previously, when China was very much in poverty, before they started transitioning to more of a free market economy, the PRC, they wouldn't be able to pull off any type of reunification by force. Let's just put it that way. And a lot of their new wealth that they have been acquiring has been allocated to their military. Meanwhile, I don't think Taiwan has really been investing too much into defense.
If they wanted to, they could definitely invest more, because Taiwan is definitely a wealthy nation. They make money.
Ironically, Taiwan has their own form of national identity coming up.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a poll,
and that's despite the fact that they're not increasing their military spending.
Yeah. So 83% of their population identifies as Taiwanese rather than Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
And very few people in Taiwan are sympathetic to the CCP. And who could really blame them after having a front row seat to the horrific mass atrocities like the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution and in more recent history, the suppression of Hong Kong democracy protest. Like China is a totalitarian country.
Right, especially because they're doing fine on their own. Again, they're a wealthy nation. They have a high standard of living. They have a high GDP per capita. They have no reason to want to be a part of China, with the exception of China has a massive military. So for better or for worse, that's probably the only thing that China has going for them that would interest the Chinese even a little bit, in either a negative or a positive way.
But what the ultimate thing is, though, is what Taiwan expects U.S. protection, and the U.S. clearly has no. Well, no, they have a policy. They just don't have a clear policy.
It's a handshake agreement, basically.
If the U.S. will protect them or not, so that's the issue. So, Doug Bando, he writes for Cato, the Cato Institute, and he called this strategic ambiguity. So the U.S. is refusing to take a clear position, then both sides will be confused and won't do anything stupid.
It's pretty smart, actually.
That was his take. That's what U.S. policy is: strategic ambiguity. So let either side know what the U.S. is going to do. So don't give Taiwan the impression that you'll have its back, so they won't start shit, and vice versa. Don't let China know that you wouldn't go protect them, because then they'll start shit. So that's the reason for the policy, to make everyone confused and unsure, and ultimately just continue the status quo. Because I don't think anyone wants that to happen. Which I would say, that would probably be the real politic thing to do, right? Or the Machiavellian type thing to do, is just don't really comment too much. Make very vague comments when it comes to the Taiwan situation. Nevertheless, with these the tensions rising, especially in the news and in the face of we're coming off trade wars, and now we're coming off COVID, and now there's more and more evidence that COVID came from a lab in Wuhan. But with these tensions rising, policymakers are advocating for the U.S. to finally make an explicit defense pact with Taiwan.
Mm-hmm.
And what a lot of analysts are saying is that just by making that defense pact, that would be enough to deter China from invading. Which honestly does make sense. That's not, I wouldn't call you a psychopath for saying that. If we just made that pact with with Taiwan, and we said, hey, we guarantee your protection, that would solve everything. Like, China would never even dare confront the United States. They wouldn't dare get into a conflict with the United States. There's so much on the line. Xi Jinping would ruin China. He would bring about its ultimate downfall. So why not just make a pact with them? Because the threat of going to war with the United States is such a deterrent that they would never even think twice about moving forward with an invasion.
But is it, though?
But
is it a deterrent?
It certainly seems like it would be, but what if it wasn't?
Mm-hmm.
What if it wasn't? So another big think tank piece that came out recently about this China. This one came out a couple of days ago from Foreign Affairs magazine, and the title, the report, the study is called "The Taiwan Temptation: Why Beijing Might Resort to Force." It was written by Oriana Schuyler Mastro, who is a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And the American Enterprise Institute is at the forefront of warning against, ultimately, the idea of ever cutting defense spending. That's what they do. They just say, no, we can't cut defense spending, we'll be conquered. That's basically what that think tank does. Which I kind of think a lot of this fervor or whatever the hell, fervor. A lot of this fervor coming out right now is to justify bigger budgets. I don't know if you feel the same way.
Hell yeah. Yeah, I think
you can justify a way bigger budget too if you're going to fight China, or more so if you're going to like an actual state with 1 billion people that is modernizing its military than the Taliban. Like, think about the difference in power.
Of course. Without a doubt. And there's plenty of companies like defense contractors that stand to make a shit ton of money like these, and they're the folks who fund a lot of these think tanks, and they're the ones that are putting people to do the research. So of course.
And these think tanks are also
without a doubt
they're funded by the aerospace companies.
Right.
Their seed money
100%.
is given to them from like Lockheed Martin and Boeing.
Yeah, Raytheon's like, here's
just like,
here's
hey, write this
I want
fucking
you to
study about how much more money that we need to make.
Right. Raytheon will be like, yo, here's $100K. Write me an article, and a policy piece that says like we should probably bomb someone. Anyone, I don't care.
Upgrade our 4th generation stealth bombers or whatever.
Right.
We need to upgrade our jammer technology. We need a grade level 47948 and a Humvee vehicle that's amphibious and can also go on the Antarctic deck and wither the Antarctic cold, because the next war will take place in Antarctica. So we need to prepare
against
for
the
our
aliens,
budgets
against the aliens
in Antarctica. A lot of people are saying the UFO stories that are coming out right now.
Oh, they are coming out, and they're all just like Raytheon like ploys to get us to like spend more money on the government, the military. Yeah, probably. I do want to do, if we have time sometime this month, I would like to explore that, because I'm a huge alien nut, and tell us in the tell us on Twitter, tell us anywhere. Like,
we can do that
if you want to hear about that, because I'm super interested in that shit.
Let's definitely do that in the next couple of weeks, because we've already talked about it with some of the people on our Patreon who want us to do that episode. So but people have been saying, I haven't really been paying attention to this UFO crap, to be completely honest, because my take is that, I mean, how the hell, if there are aliens visiting us, I don't care how many F-35s that we manufacture or what new technology would make. if they're able to travel from one galaxy to another galaxy and land here, and if they're aggressive, we're not going to. They have most likely figured out a way to wipe out all organisms on this planet that are a threat to them, without destroying like the natural resources they need. That's just my frame of thought.
Yeah.
They most likely.
And I think there's a lot of arguments that align directly with that. There are a few counter ones for that as well, and I'd love to get into that in a different episode. But let's get back to the Taiwan bit, and so we were talking again just to refocus.
Okay, sorry.
On this foreign
off the
affairs
rails
magazine.
All right, so we were talking about the American Enterprise Institute, their study about the threat of China and all this. So I'm not reading the entire thing, just some key passages that I found interesting. So China has accelerated its military operations in the vicinity of Taiwan, conducted 380 incursions into the island's air defense identification zone in 2020 alone. In April of this year, China sent its largest ever fleet, 25 fighters and bombers, into Taiwan's air defense identification zone.
Yeah.
So
I mentioned that a little earlier. That's the one I was talking about. It's crazy. That is we would never do that to China. We would never do that to Russia. Without like by being a total accident or wanting to start a fight. That's what that is.
And to put this in a little more context, back in 1996, China did some missile tests in the Taiwan Strait, and allegedly it was to send a message to Taiwan like, hey, it's China, it's the dragon, China. And the U.S. reacted. They sent 2 aircraft carriers, and then they
shut them up, basically.
They basically apologized and said sorry about that. Now it's a different context. The post 2000s.
In 96, in 96, they weren't shit. They were firing off a bunch of rockets basically to scare Taiwan and be like, oh, look, we can reach you. And then the U.S. sends over, like you said, a strike group, like a carrier strike group, and they completely pulled a John Cena and apologized about it.
And that was before the disaster of the Iraq War in 2003. So it was like, oh, they just came off from picking on these other countries. We better watch out.
That's right, and that's when I think we had a lot more. We haven't exactly won a war in a while, so we have a pretty bad track record right now. Even though our military power is a force to be reckoned with, without a doubt. China now has weapons that have capability to mess with a carrier strike group for sure. So the gravity of a strike group today is a little less if you're China than it was before. We can't do that anymore, not with impunity.
Well, they'll sink aircraft carriers, but
we could try. They'll certainly try.
Mm-hmm. They'll most likely succeed. So much of the modernization, including updates to hardware, organization, force structure, and training, was designed to enable the People's Liberation Army to invade and occupy Taiwan. Xi expanded the military's capabilities further, undertaking the most ambitious restructuring of the PLA since its founding, aimed specifically at enabling Chinese forces to conduct joint operations in which the Air Force, the Navy, the Army, and the Strategic Rocket Force fight seamlessly together, whether during an amphibious landing, a blockade, or a missile attack. Exactly the kinds of operations needed for armed unification. Several retired military officers have argued publicly that the longer China waits, the harder it will be to take control of Taiwan. Articles in state... That is true.
Very true.
Articles in state-run news outlets and on popular websites have likewise urged China to act swiftly. And if public opinion polls are to be believed, the Chinese people agree that the time has come to resolve the Taiwan issue once and for all. According to a survey by the state-run Global Times, 70% of mainlanders strongly support using force to unify Taiwan with the mainland, and 37% think it would be best if the war occurred in 3 to 5 years.
So I don't believe those numbers because it is a state-run global, the state-run Global Times, but I definitely think that, you know, because of the rise of Chinese nationalism, that the opinion about, you know, solving the Taiwan issue is definitely risen. Well, I don't know if it's like a 70%.
I want to see that poll
strong
because
support.
70 and 37% don't match up, right? That's more.
No,
that'd be 107%.
What they're saying here. No. It's one of those like.
Did they ask two questions? Like, do you want to go with the war with Taiwan
it's
once?
Two questions. No, it's what they're saying is 70% of the mainlanders support using force to take Taiwan.
Okay, gotcha.
And that's one question. The second question is, do you want to do it in 3 to 5 years? You know, so
I gotcha. I
still don't believe those numbers. They seem fairly high. You know, I don't think we can get 70% of Americans to agree on shit. You know, I don't really know what the Chinese culture is like, but something tells me that they're not all completely unified. And if these are the real numbers that they're getting from people, it's because if you don't say that, then, you know, maybe you'll be in trouble or lose social credit score or something like that.
The only the only country that you'll see legitimate poll numbers like this and like legitimate voting numbers like this that are very consistent across the entire population is Syria when it comes to voting for Assad, 95%.
Exactly.
That's the only place you're going to find legitimate numbers like that. 95%.
95% of the time,
is good.
He wins 100% of the time.
Yeah.
Right.
But let's go on. Let's go on, Harry, your wizard. The Chinese analysts and officials I have spoken to have revealed similar sentiments. Even moderate voices have admitted that not only are calls for armed unification proliferating within the CCP, but also they themselves have recommended military action to senior Chinese leadership. Others in Beijing dismiss concerns about a Chinese invasion as overblown, but in the same breath they acknowledge that Xi is surrounded by military advisors who tell him with confidence that China can now regain Taiwan by force at an acceptable cost. So,
all right, debatable on the acceptable cost bit. Maybe because China hasn't been to war in like, I don't know, 70 years or something like that. Maybe because they haven't been in a major conflict, they haven't, you know, developed the same aversion that other modern countries have to loss of life. Like the United States as an example, like the UK, like Australia, you know, France, places like that. Like these Western countries, we don't like even a single person dying. Like it's a tragedy, and it should be that way. But maybe because China hasn't been in a major conflict where they've lost, you know, lives, that they believe that anything is an acceptable cost to try and regain Taiwan. But as we'll chat about, I guess in a bit here, you know, can they do it? Are they capable of doing it? You know, are they prepared to launch a major campaign on the island of Taiwan?
Well, what they're doing is that they prepared 4 campaigns apparently, and 4 campaigns to take over the island. One of them, some of them they can clearly do, and some, you know, one of them they can't do. And the first one that they can do is that they can airstrike the shit out of military targets.
Sure.
Using missiles and bombers, they'll be able to hit military targets. They're also going to be
100%.
able to blockade Taiwan if they wanted to. And
maybe.
And then they're also going to be able to hit U.S. forces deployed nearby with ballistic missiles and stuff like that.
Range-wise, sure, they have the range for it. I'll give them that.
And then finally, the fourth and final campaign is an amphibious assault.
That one's the most unlikely, in my opinion.
There's no way. Well, I don't want to say no way, but an amphibious assault.
I got a lot of notes on that. We can talk about that in a bit, but I think the first three they can. Yeah, I definitely have a lot of notes on that. We'll talk about that in a second. But the first three things that you mentioned is within the realm of capability. Whether or not they actually go forward with it is another question altogether. Like the third one, like a missile and airstrikes against the U.S. forces deployed nearby, like that. Technically, can they do it? Sure. Like in an actual situation, like in an actual like conflict situation, do we think that they'd have the balls to try? That's a different question,
But this is concerning.
I guess it really.
What are they capable of doing?
Yeah,
they're capable. They're capable of doing all of that.
Right. I mean, I'm capable of punching you in the face, but like, am I going to actually?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, but what are you capable of doing successfully? And the only thing that they're not capable of doing successfully, if they wanted to pay the toll of consequences, whether that be internal consequences or external consequences from the outside world, the only thing that they probably wouldn't be able to do, they succeed at, is a beach landing.
Well, I mean, again, if we're only talking about capability, I think they have the capability, but the cost would be so immense that it wouldn't be feasible. And I don't mean like money cost. I mean like human cost, lives. Sorry. I mean, they're all capable on paper. How feasible it is, I think, is up for debate. But then, like, I do want to like focus on that U.S. bit because you could try and hit the U.S. and maybe the U.S. always intended to back up Taiwan, right? And the question would be like, could the U.S. reach Taiwan and like help them out in time, right? I think that there's estimates about this that the Chinese say that they can do it in 2 weeks, right? So, like, the Chinese people say it themselves. Like, the military thinks that they can do this in 2 weeks. Is 2 weeks enough time? Could the U.S. react in time?
I mean, they could also potentially keep the U.S. in the dark during the early hours of the attack. Like, this paper was talking about, like, spoofing and jamming technologies. So, potentially,
like radar jamming?
Yeah, radar jamming. So the U.S. Navy might not even be able to react right away to if they were going to do a full-out assault on Taiwan. It may be even too late.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it really depends on where the strike group is placed at the moment. But, I mean, even if they did radar jamming, to be honest, the equalizer in all of this is like space and military assets in space, like satellites. We can literally just look and see what's going on. Any one of these four campaigns are major campaigns that we would be able to see relatively easily. Like you don't set up a blockade and not have somebody notice. You don't fire off volleys of hundreds of missiles and not have that caught on satellite. You also definitely don't attack U.S. forces and not notice. And of course, for an amphibious assault, any amphibious assault that they would want to try, that would have to be like very large scale, because again, Taiwan is a pretty sizable country with a sizable active military.
How dare you call it a country?
Well, you know what I mean, though.
Let's talk about the amphibious assault.
Okay. So, I can kind of like shift around. I got some notes on this stuff. So I actually read a article, and it actually makes the case that Taiwan can actually win a war. with China, which it sounds on the face of it just ridiculous. This was on foreign policy. This guy named Tanner Green, he wrote this in September 2018. So some of the numbers are a little bit old, a lot, especially on the like counts of military and counts of like weaponry and stuff like that. A lot has changed, but the general idea I think still is very poignant. And he wrote, and he was mentioning how she has been ratcheting up, this idea of like doing something about Taiwan, and he quoted him in saying that he said, quote, well, we have firm will, full confidence, and sufficient capability to defeat any form of Taiwan independence secession plot. We will never allow any person, any organization, or political party to split any part of the Chinese territory from China at any time or in any form. So basically, she's putting his foot down, right? And it seems imminent. And this guy here, he's bringing up two major studies that were recent. One was by Michael Beckley, who is a political science scientist at Tufts University, and the other one is Ian Easton, who is a fellow at Project 2049 Institute, and he wrote a book on this particular topic called The Chinese Invasion Threat, Taiwan's Defense and American Strategy in Asia. And he uses those two studies to like paint a picture of like what would happen. And I think we kind of brought up some of the first bits, right? If you ask the Chinese, this is a clean sweep, and according to Xi and all the people that are whispering into his ear about how, that they can do it, with a reasonable cost. This is the point that I'm kind of scoffing at a little bit. But, to your point, it's going to start with rockets, Chinese rockets. So the PLA, the People's Liberation Army, they literally have a rocket force. How we have the Air Force, the Marines, and the Army and things like that. They have a rocket force that's dedicated solely to missile
Rockets.
warfare, and it's exactly, and it's actually kind of incredible. And they have some of the highest caches of medium range rocket weapons, which can easily strike Taiwan, right? That are well within range to hit Taiwan, and so they're going to start launching a crazy barrage against Taiwan, and particularly they're going to target things like infrastructure and like military things, so airfields, communication hubs, radar equipment, transportation nodes, and of course government offices as well. And they're going to do this to basically crumble the infrastructure before they ever even think about doing any invasion. And at the same time, I was reading that there are actual plans in China about like activating sleeper cells in Taiwan. So basically Chinese nationals who infiltrate Taiwan and maybe even like sneaking over some special forces to like double up on the shock and awe campaign. Basically what they're saying is they have these plans to do like political assassinations. So to kill people like the president or people in her cabinet or party leaders or even like important infrastructural people like scientists and engineers, stuff that, like the Mossad does against Iranian, nuclear physicists. But also like even famous people, to be honest, like they're just targeting a lot of high priority people. And the reason why they're doing this is not only just to soften the Taiwanese defenses for a potential amphibious assault, but also, frankly, just to crush morale of the Taiwanese people. And these are actually plans that they have. Now, getting to the point here of the amphibious assault, this would involve tens of thousands of Chinese ships, and the majority of them would be merchant ships. Actually, they wouldn't be like military ships. China doesn't have that many. But the reason why they'd need tens of thousands of them is because you would need to ferry over something like 1 million soldiers. And yeah, I'm not even joking, 1 million soldiers. They'd need that big of an occupying force because, first of all, Taiwan is a very well-populated country, right? And as we noted before, not a lot of them are sympathetic to the CCP. Not a lot of them are going to be happy about the fact that they're invading. And they have something like 2.5 million reservists, so like they do conscription, not unlike, in Israel. And they they would arm them, and so you would need a shit ton of people on that island to keep like a martial law going, but also because China would want to use Taiwan as the forward operating base or the war zone, because if they do anything, the US and Japan are probably going to respond, right? And so they don't want that fighting to happen on mainland China. They want it to happen in Taiwan. But Xi and his people apparently are resolute to saying that they'll get it done in 2 weeks. But I think what this article was super interesting about is that I don't think it's going to be that easy. So I want to tell a quick little story to kind of highlight why this isn't going to be so easy. So do you remember in 2017, during the hurricane that happened in Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria?
I do.
Yeah, so it was terrible. I actually went out to Puerto Rico after there. The destruction was disgusting.
Your grandmother was there, right?
Yep, I went out and
she was safe.
That's actually, what? She's safe. I'll tell you the story about that because I think it's super fascinating. My grandmother, she was at the time, I think 84 years old or something like that, right? Older woman. And she lives in not San Juan, Puerto Rico. She lives in like the middle of the mountain in Puerto Rico, a place called Cuamo. And when the hurricane hit, the power went out, the communications went out. Like, we didn't hear from her for like 2 weeks, and she was out there on her own. One day, my uncle is watching the news about the hurricane, and she is on TV. Like, my grandma was being interviewed by some random reporter who got the balls to jump in a car and go out to the rest of the real island, not just San Juan, to like do some real reporting. And by fucking chance, they ended up interviewing my grandma, who was telling the story about how like she's totally fine, and her house is like a concrete box, so her roof wasn't ripped off. I can't say the same for some of her neighbors. Some of those houses were totally destroyed. I saw them with my own eyes. But the reporter was asking her like, how's it been like without electricity and running water and all that stuff? And she told him, well, like, I was born before there was like electricity in these towns and stuff like that. It's fine. Like, I'm used to it. It's cool. And then she also made a funny comment. She was like, because she lives in the mountain and there's a lot of trees and shit, but the hurricane basically stripped all of the trees of all their foliage, and it like created this like beautiful like landscape view, because now she can see beyond the trees. And she was like, look at this beautiful view that I have now. It's like I can see all the way to the coastline and stuff like that. And she was a true sport about it. And I went a few weeks later, like as soon as we can find a flight to get out there, and we hooked her up and we got her like a solar panel, and we tried to bring her home with us, but she refused. You can't tell a 84-year-old woman shit. Like once they're set, they're set.
It's very hard to get an elderly person to travel, even though there's a natural disaster. Like,
yeah, she was good. She was fine. She was like, I'm good.
Good.
I got my cat. I'm good.
The movie.
Anyway,
let's not get too tracked off. I almost said tracked off. Let's not get too off tracked with other movie stories. But yeah, go back to your original.
I'm talking about
point
Puerto
about
Rico.
that.
Yeah, I'm talking about Puerto Rico for a reason, right? So if you remember, and this is kind of a funnier moment in political history, President Trump was, on the news, and he was explaining, basically defending himself and the administration for their response to Hurricane Maria, which, as you know, was kind of like on the par or close to the response to Hurricane Katrina, right? It wasn't great, is what I'm trying to say. And he said that one of the reasons why it was so hard to provide help to the island was that it was an island. So he said, and I quote, "This is an island surrounded by water, big water, ocean water." If you remember that quote, it's just like him sounding like a fucking idiot. And the administration's response to the devastation was obviously shit, but he wasn't technically wrong. Like, Puerto Rico is in fact an island, and it is surrounded by big ocean water. But Puerto Rico isn't a wealthy and well-armed nation that was resisting the United States. So bringing this back to Taiwan, while it shares the experience of being an island like Puerto Rico, Taiwan, on the other hand, is a wealthy relatively well-armed nation that has no intention of allowing the PLA to just take a leisurely cruise over to the beach and, take over without a fight. Like, that's not going to happen, right? And so I put so much emphasis on this island bit because weather plays such a huge part in this, like, in any successful, like, military maneuver on the water. And, one thing that pretty much all the experts know about this particular situation is that, that there's a limited time period where you could conduct a major military operation in that strait between China and Taiwan. And turns out April and October are your only two windows. They're the only 2 months in the entire year where there are little to no storms, where the wind and the waves
That's funny
are low.
because that's just that's the opposite of the Western Hemisphere. Like where we October and April is where we get the most storms.
Right. So it's but right over there, like they know that April and October that you get almost no storms, the winds and the waves are low. So in other words, this is the only good time to send tens of thousands of ships across even the relatively short 100-mile trip from the mainland to Taiwan, right? So you only have two windows that you can do it. And also, fun fact, in April, fog levels are the highest that they are in the entire year, right? So in April, the average visibility distance is 1.5 miles, like visual visibility. 1.5 miles isn't very far, right? Like you could be sailing into a trap, basically. So, it's not just by the weather alone. It's not an easy thing to accomplish. And also, there are only 13 beaches on Taiwan's western coast that the PLA could use to do an amphibious landing. Like the rest of it is just rugged and not a beach, So obviously, if there's only 13 places where they could land, the Taiwanese people are prepared for a conflict in those 13 places. So they've set up things like underground tunnels and subterranean supply depots, things like that to make it so that they have the logistics and the infrastructure to resist, right? It's kind of like, the beaches in Normandy were set up for an invasion, But the point though is everybody knows this, including the Taiwanese military and the PLA. So the PLA are going to lose their element of surprise. The Taiwanese are going to know exactly when and where they get hit. Even more to the point, though, you don't just whip up 1 million people and stick them on tens of thousands of ships at a moment's notice. Like, that takes a long time to organize that much stuff. So I have a quote for you here. Easton estimates that Taiwanese, American, and Japanese leaders will know that the PLA is preparing for a cross-strait war more than 60 days before hostilities begin. They will know for certain that an invasion will happen more than 30 days before the first missiles are fired. This will give the Taiwanese ample time to move much of their command and control infrastructure into the hardened mountain tunnels, move their fleet out of vulnerable ports, detect suspected agents and intelligence operatives, litter the ocean with sea mines, disperse and camouflage army units across the country, put the economy on a war footing, and distribute weapons to Taiwan's 2.5 million reservists. So the Taiwanese here are going to have a heads up to prepare. Like a lot of heads up. They're going to know exactly where and when it's going to hit. They're gonna have an opportunity here, right? It's definitely not going to be a surprise attack. But then the question always comes down to like, oh, but so what? China has a bigger military. They spend way more money on the military. I mean, we're just talking about how Taiwan hasn't increased their military budget since like 2012, or very lightly increased their military budget. Meanwhile, China's building aircraft carriers and fucking stealth fighters and shit. Right? So let's compare that really quickly. So these numbers are as of 2018, but this was the most comprehensive numbers that I can find from the same source.
And to add to your point, just because you have the most expensive military doesn't mean you have the best military.
That's right. So as of 2018 at least, and trust me, a lot of these numbers are way low for today's standards, with this 3 years ago, and China's done a lot on this front, and so is Taiwan actually. But as of 2018, China's military budget was 154 billion. Taiwan's is 10.4 billion. Active duty troops in China were 915. That number now is like 1.3 million in China. Taiwan was 140,000, so that's a lot different. Tanks, so China has 7,400 tanks. That's kind of I don't love that number, because like half of those tanks are like 1950s, like Cold War, like T-90 tanks and shit. Like they're shit. But let's just give it to them. 7,400 of them, and Taiwan only has 1,200. So artillery, China has 10,600. Taiwan has about 2,300. But all this stuff is terrestrial, right? So really, we got to talk about the Navy, because this is going to be a marine battle for sure. So the Navy, the destroyers, China has 20. Taiwan has 4 frigates. China has 39. Taiwan has 22. So it's a more even match there. Submarines is not even a competition. China has 34. Taiwan has 2, although a different thing that I read, they're up to 4 now. But let's be real, that's not enough. Coastal Missile Patrol, this is more even. So these are just literal ships that have missiles on them that do like close to shore operations. So 68 for China and 44 for Taiwan. And finally, the one that's the most evenly matched, which will also be a very important part of this battle, is fighter jets. So 400 for China and 420 for Taiwan. So in this case, actually, Taiwan has an edge, and I'd argue has a massive edge if we're just doing toe-to-toe fighter jets, because neither side can use every ship, every fighter right now, because many of them are being serviced and things like that. But by many accounts, Taiwan's got more up-to-date fighters, and things like the J-20, like the new stealth fighter that China has, they have like maybe 10 total. Like the majority of their planes are old as dirt. So fighter jet to fighter jet, there's there, but like for the rest of that entire comparison, like China's winning on pretty much all the fronts. So there's definitely this imbalance in the power there. But honestly, military dollars don't win wars, right? I mean, if they did, we wouldn't be stuck in the Middle East for more than 20 years, right?
Well, would the Taiwanese adopt that guerrilla style warfare like the Taliban does? Or 100%. Like the Iraqi insurgency does? Or would they just 100%. say, hey, listen, like, we don't want to go through this. We don't want to like live the life of war. We don't want to rebel. We don't want violence. We don't want to lose our family members. We just want to continue our standard of living. Yeah, we'll beat China again. Just give us some autonomy as far as like, our own courts and stuff like that. And, let us have some separation from the government in Beijing. And, maybe we can be something like Hong Kong. But like a better deal than Hong Kong has right now.
No, nobody wants to be like Hong Kong right now, to be honest.
Yeah, I guess that's not a great point. But can we be like Hong Kong was like 15 years ago rather than 2 years ago? Yeah. Like, do you think that they could work something out like that? Like, because the way of life, because Taiwan is a wealthier nation in the world. Like
that's right.
I'm convinced. Like sometimes I go back and forth with this thought process, and I'm not sure entirely, what. I'm constantly changing my mind. If there were invaders in the U.S., let's just say if there was some more powerful country, the UFOs, the alien species,
the UAPs.
But let's just say they were, using just upgraded tactics rather than just technology that would completely obliterate us, but we were able to resist them to some degree, but we'd be living a life of hell, like just every man, woman, and child in America would be armed and ready to fight and constantly losing family members and drone alien strikes and things like that. Would we fight to preserve America as we know it? Would the United States fight? Like, would we give up or would we submit? I don't know. I don't know. I think elements of the United States, like different communities would fight. Washington, D.C. would submit. The people who live in that area of the country and the Beltway would submit. But your rednecks down south will probably kill.
I mean, you know,
will kill. The rednecks down south will kill.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, so
you know what I mean?
Are there Taiwanese
so I'm saying,
rednecks,
like, what
you know?
I'm saying, like, how would Taiwan just say, "Fuck it, we don't care anymore. We don't feel like going through this shit. We don't want to. We don't want to live in a war zone. We'll just be part of China." Like,
I don't think they will. I don't think they will. I think they'll fight. I think you pointed out, like, the numbers on how many people in Taiwan identify as Taiwanese, how many people or lack thereof, sympathize or support the CCP, and already I'm already starting to make a case that this isn't going to be a surprise attack. They're going to have plenty of time to prepare. It's going to be like fucking Kevin McAllister setting up his shit on Home Alone when the sticky bandits were outside of the house and they were like, "Yeah, we're gonna come tomorrow and we're gonna hit him when he's scared and hiding under the bed." Like fucking Joe Pesci and whatever the other guy's name is, right? So that's basically the situation that they're gonna set up, and I'm not even kidding, dude. It is gonna be a straight up like Home Alone situation because this country, again, Taiwan they have a shit ton of money, and maybe they haven't been increasing their military expenditure over the last couple of years, but they don't necessarily have to. It's a lot cheaper to build a ship, killing missile than it costs to build a ship, and you don't need that many of them. You just don't. Here's some interesting stuff, right? They can make it extremely painful for China. So coming back to this article again, he's writing that, first of all, Taiwan has missiles also, and they can hit China back. So, yeah, China's going to hit them, but Taiwan's going to fire missiles right back. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to hit staging areas like Fuzhou, and they're also going to target radar systems along China's east coast. And they're going to be relatively successful. It's, like you said, it's not a very far thing. It's 80 miles. Like, many surface-to-air missiles at this point can make that journey accurately, I might add, so it's kind of like the situation in North Korea where they have a shit ton of artillery pointed at Seoul. Would they win a forever war? Maybe not, but like they can definitely make it very painful for anyone who's gonna try and invade them. So they're gonna hit them with missiles, and they're definitely gonna hit all of the ships that are coming along to try and do an amphibious assault, because basically those ships are going to be sitting ducks. Let's be real. Taiwan does have a number of submarines, and honestly, all they need to do is park them in the middle of the ocean and wait. And as soon as there's enough of those missiles, enough of those ships overhead, they're gonna launch a bunch of torpedoes, and they have plenty of them. And also they have F-16s that fire harpoon missiles, which are surface to water missiles, right? And they're ship killer missiles. And also, this is pretty interesting, they have a fucking mountain bunker in the middle of the island, and evidently they have these mountain bunkers that are empty, that are like basically airplane hangars, where they're storing shit tons of sorties of these F-16. So it's like a bee's nest, like they're all going to come out like a bee's nest. So they have like a place that is nuclear proof that they can hide. What else? So sea mines, dude, sea mines. Remember we were talking about limpet mines when that oil tanker got hit in the canal there a couple months ago?
Yeah, the limpet mine is like that Go explain what a limpet mine is, because I don't want to butcher this, but
Yeah,
I
so
kinda know what
limpet
it is.
mines are just like they float around in the ocean and they're magnetic, and then you know,
Yeah.
if they stick to you, like they explode. There's also moored mines, which are like on tethers, right? So like you have an anchor and they put it in the bottom of the ocean, and then there's a mine, and then it also has magnets on it, and like if you swim by it, like it'll blow up. Mines are fucking hard to like. There's a reason why like you're not under international law. You're not supposed to mine things anymore. But they would definitely do it if it was like life or death situation. They'll certainly fucking mine the shit out of their entire coastline, like without thinking twice about it. And that's incredibly hard to debug. Here's some more interesting stuff. I'm gonna read you a quote. The first craft to cross the shore will be met, as Easton's research shows, with a sudden wall of flame springing up from the water from the miles of oil-filled pipelines sunk underneath. I'm going to explain what this is for a second. They've got... They obviously, remember, they know that there's only 13 places where China can possibly land, right? And so what they've done is they've put miles of oil pipeline underneath the water by those shores, and they've rigged them up in such a way that if they wanted to, they can just release a shit ton of oil into the water and light it on fire. What does that remind you of?
So like, it reminds me of, God damn it. It sounds like a Game of Thrones. Wait, let me.
100%. Yep, it is Game of Thrones.
Wait,
what am I
let me-
talking about?
You're talking about. Probably need to timestamp this thing. What fucking battle was this?
You want me to just tell you?
Just tell me.
Okay, it's the Battle of Blackwater Bay, right? Where
Shit!
where
Yeah.
fucking Tyrion, puts a shit ton of wildfire in the water in the bay, right? And they just like pretend like they're not putting up a fight, and they lure all the ships in as far into the bay as possible. And then as soon as they're in close enough, they fire one. Fucking Bronn fires one flaming arrow into the water, and giant green wildfire explosion, right? And they have this. Like, they literally have this. They're willing to straight up poison the oceans with like an oil slick and just light the fucking ocean on fire, which is so metal. And they've literally already built this. They have this capability.
It is pretty metal would be the best way to describe that.
It's very metal. So, and he goes on and he says, all right, so they have to get through torpedoes, they have to get through, fighter jets, they have to get through limpet mines and moored mines, sea mines basically, and then they have to get through the wildfire, right? And they have to do all of these things in a 4-week period that at least one of those 2 4-week periods has maybe about 1.5 miles of visibility because of all the fog. And then if they just happen to make it by, and we're talking about like thousands of ships are going to get destroyed at this point, like how many ships have to go down before China's like, hey, maybe this isn't worth it. But let's say they just keep pressing on and they don't care how many people die. Then when they get there to the island, they're going to be met with, and I'll just read it from the quote because the way he writes it is cool. So he says, he faces what Easton describes as a mile's worth of razor wire nets, hook boards, skin-peeling planks, barbed wire fences, wire obstacles, spike strips, landmines, anti-tank barrier walls, anti-tank obstacles, bamboo spikes, felled trees, truck shipping containers, and junkyard cars. So basically, they're going to set up so many fucking booby traps on the landing bay, on the beaches. It's going to be a epic pain in the ass to do an amphibious assault. And so, this is another interesting thing. I found this super fascinating. So he was writing about how the Chinese Air Force or even the rocket forces, the big thing is that they're going to hit the infrastructure, right? And they're going to shoot volleys and volleys of missiles to make it easier and softer targets for them to be able to deploy amphibiously. But the Taiwanese are very well aware of this, and they've created like decoy targets and dummy equipment, kind of like in World War II. Do you remember when they had those like inflatable tanks and shit?
Yeah.
That they would just like litter around the landscape to make the Nazis think that there were more of them than there were. So they have the same thing, and they have a heads up on when to put them out there. But also what's super interesting is this guy Beckley, who is one of the studies that was published the year before this article was written. He wrote in the 1990 to 1991 Gulf War, 88,500 tons of ordnance dropped by the U.S.-led coalition did not destroy a single Iraqi road mobile missile launcher. NATO's 78-day campaign aimed at Serbian air defenses only managed to destroy 3 of Serbia's 22 mobile missile batteries. There is no reason to think that the Chinese Air Force will have a higher success rate when targeting Taiwan's mobile artillery and missile defense. So what he's writing is that historically, for the U.S., 2-time World War, champions, like we had a really tough time destroying mobile artillery and mobile missile launchers. So China's probably going to have the same problem, which means that those missile launchers are going to be intact when those amphibious assault vehicles are making their way onto the beach, which means they're going to be in a lot of trouble. And so if you want to ignore all of the things that I just mentioned, and you say, know what, China's going to make it, they're going to keep going, only after all of that shit, well, then they have to deal with Taiwan's 140,000 active duty military, as well as up to 2.5 million reservists who at that point have been activated and armed, and they hid them all over the fucking place, in cities, in jungles, and all over the place, just waiting to carry out a protracted war. Last quote I'll give you, and then I'll turn over the mic here. So he says, yes, the Taiwanese army projects that it can only hold off its enemy for 2 weeks after the landing. But the PLA also believes that it cannot defeat the Taiwanese forces in under 2 weeks. It will lose the war. 2 weeks is our window here.
It sounds like if the U.S. really wanted to damage China, they would try to convince them to do this invasion.
Yeah. And all they would need to do to ensure that, it's a balanced fight is just keep selling weapons to Taiwan. And go figure what happened recently, Biden just started selling more weapons to Taiwan as early as in the last 2 weeks.
So the Machiavellian way of thinking on this would be still don't recognize them.
Correct.
Because
so that China thinks they have a chance.
So China thinks they have a chance. And don't make a comment. Just make vague comments like, we're committed to preserving democracies and
right, blah, blah,
and
blah.
then hope they invade and then just make money off of it. That would...
Yeah.
Have
and they stand to make a lot of money.
It sounds like that's what I would do. I don't want to give anyone ideas, or I don't want this podcast to give the war criminals ideas.
They're hey. They're taking notes in the background somewhere. They're like, oh,
now
they're going to bring this to the Raytheon board.
They've thought of this already.
Yeah.
We're not we're not the ones thinking
we're
of this.
We're not that smart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, but that's interesting. That actually, you actually changed my mind on a lot of stuff. I thought that I was under more the camp that China would be able to pull it off, but I think you've convinced me that they probably wouldn't be able to do it. Because I was thinking more in terms of just will the U.S. be able to stop them? But I wasn't really thinking about Taiwan's actual defense measures. Because
Right.
the answer, would the U.S. be able to stop them if they were able to just, let's just say, if Taiwan just like put up a very weak
Rolled over and
defense,
died, basically.
rolled over and died.
Yeah.
And there were
Right.
like maybe some small factions in Taiwan that were asking for military aid, and we were like, okay, we're going to come and get pulled into this. And I was thinking more in that scenario where
Right.
we probably wouldn't be able to do too much to help them, because I was looking
I don't think
at
so
these,
either. Yeah.
these war games that have been conducted by like the RAND Corporation and by a bunch of different, but by our own military. Yahoo News released this big classified document basically about like the past 2 years of war games with China, and we lost like basically all of them ended up being a loss for the United States.
Yep.
There was one quote in it where it was like, we lost so much in these war games that we stopped doing them. Like we just stopped doing them because
We just stopped playing.
we stopped playing these war games. And it was all about like China using biological weapons at all the local bases and killing everyone there, and it was just a disaster. And RAND Corporation did studies back in the early 2000s, so it was the RAND Study Corporation was based. It was written into the early 2000s, but it was anticipating the following decade. So it was written in supposed to
looking
be
ahead.
about 2010, 2011 or so, and they even had the U.S. not being able to prevent a invasion, but the way that you put it, that China can swing its dick around all at once, but I think that China's analysts know. I think that a lot of the evidence that's being used to say, hey, China's about to invade Taiwan and this is imminent, I think a lot of it's being cherry picked, because Xi Jinping, he's not an idiot, and he may want to you need to, even if you're an authoritarian president, or if you are in charge of a totalitarian state, you need you need to placate the nationalism in your country,
Right.
because that's where you're ultimately getting your legitimacy, is from nationalism. And I could see why politically Xi Jinping needs to talk tough, but I'm sure that he has other advisors in his ear who are like, hey man, we can't do this. Look at Trump. Like, every advisor, every president of the United States has their different degrees of people in their administration who vary from psychopaths to war hawks to realists. Every administration has them. Trump's psychopaths was like John Bolton.
Right.
His realists were more like McGregor, the final days. So yeah, I think I'm kind of leaning towards you, and a lot of this talk about Taiwan is more so meant to just rev up the dollars for companies like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon.
To spend more money
so.
to sell more weapons to Taiwan.
More so, not just to sell more weapons to Taiwan, to us, for if you frame like, hey, we just had a disaster, like we're coming up to a disaster. The United States will not be able to project power in the Pacific Ocean like it used to. We need to up our military budget, man. Like,
Right.
900, whatever the budget is right now. What is it, like $850 billion a year? I forget the exact number. Around that number.
It was 754, but I think they increased it again. So.
Yeah, they increased it again.
That number's
I
always...
lose track of all the times they increase it. we're going to have $1 trillion a year military budget. Well,
Yeah, in the next 5 years, easy.
In the next 5 years, it's going to be $1 trillion a year. Unless our drug addiction catches up to us, and printing money and being in massive debt, within the next 5 years. I don't know when that's going to happen, but it certainly seems like there's that looming cloud or impending doom of just incredible inflation and all this horrible economic recession that could possibly come. I mean, who knows if the Fed can print their way out of it next time, but these budgets are going to increase, and it'll be amazing. $1 trillion budget, military budget a year, and we're leaving the Middle East. It certainly seems that the United States has said it's called mercy when it comes to occupying and starting and trying to build governments in countries like Afghanistan, and when the U.S. fully leaves, when the U.S. fully leaves Afghanistan, come on, we know what's going to happen. That government's going to fold like a stack of cards pretty quickly.
Right.
They have no legitimacy. Taliban's going to be all over that. We all know that's going to happen. And it's going to be a complete man, I'm looking for the right word, but I just can't really find it.
It's going to be a shit show.
It's going to be a shit show. All right. It's going to be a very clear, it's already been very clear that these projects of nation building have been just
unsuccessful,
short-sighted, ridiculous, insane to believe that they could possibly work in any universe. So, in a way, diverting our attention to China and Russia and like these big powers that have militaries, like they actually have these big armies, and we can fight pitched battles. We can fight a battle.
Right.
This is a scenario
we wouldn't be fighting the JV squad anymore, right? So
we wouldn't be fighting the JV squad anymore. So we can fight we've always wanted to have just picture a battle with the Russians, or picture a battle with the billion Chinese soldiers.
Right.
It sounds like a cool video game, right?
It sounds like every Call of Duty video game since 2010.
Well, every single Call of Duty game, isn't the villain always some ambiguous?
It's either Russia or
Eastern,
China or both.
Oh, isn't that? Don't they make up countries? They'll be like, oh, he's from Zagistan.
They make up a Middle East. So what they do is they make up a Middle Eastern country, right, where the battle takes place, but it's always fought by China and or Russia against the U.S. in that territory. But there was a I forget which Call of Duty that was I think it was Modern Warfare 2, if I'm not mistaken, where the Russians actually do invade mainland U.S. and it was fun. There was Burger Town and shit like that. That was a cool video game. Quite enjoyed it.
I never knew that.
Yeah,
I always thought they just to avoid controversy they made up country. They made up some fictional country like Zagistan or something like that.
Yeah, they always made up the Zagistans, right? That was always because they definitely shit on those countries, right? And they didn't make them look very great. But it was always a proxy war, right? That was just the stage set for the Russians and the Americans to ultimately duke it out in those particular regions. And then there was the weird Call of Duty, which was in fucking space or some shit, and it featured Jon Snow. I'm not even kidding. Kit Harington was the evil bad guy in this Call of Duty video game.
It's a weird casting.
Sucked. Yeah, it was super weird.
I don't picture him as a villain.
No, I don't want it. No.
I don't want my queen. Oh.
My queen.
Oh, my queen.
All right. Kind of somewhat related to this while we're talking about space. Can I tell you a interesting theory about how China could invade Taiwan and, by extension, could beat the United States.
By computer virus?
Not exactly. So,
Virus. Cold. It's cold. What gets cold? I'm doing
if you
Jeff Goldblum
if you remember
in Independence Day, but my impression is not very good.
if you remember, I was saying that Taiwan gets a heads up about, Taiwan and Japan and the US, like everybody gets a heads up that China's like preparing to like invade. And the reason why they get this heads up is because, again, the force that you need to amass is going to be massive, and it would show up very easily on satellite imagery. However, if you're China and you want to get this done, you attack United States military satellites. You take those offline first. And the reason why is that this is potentially feasible is because China is spending like 2 or 3 times more on space and like space R&D than we are, by a lot, actually. They're kicking our ass in space right now. And they've got double the amount of military satellites, and they're civilians, and they've got a shit ton of civilian satellites too. But all of their Chinese corporations are just the government anyway, so they can commandeer all of those satellites. The likelihood that they have some kind of like satellite to satellite weaponry in space is probably pretty high. It's also probably pretty high for us too, to be honest. Like, we definitely have weapons up there that we're not talking about. Like, I have no doubt in my mind. And also, China has ballistic missiles on the ground that have the ability to shoot satellites out of the sky.
And to shoot Los Angeles and basically any city in the country in the United States.
Right.
I would imagine.
But I mean, but very specifically, all they have to do is like launch one major campaign, and make it look like an accident, right? Just blow up a series of military U.S. military satellites, and maybe that creates a situation like Gravity. You ever watch that movie with Sandra Bullock? Where, like,
I did. It was very. It was good.
The one satellite blows up, and then it causes like this like swarm of shit that like goes around the Earth at like 10,000 miles per hour, and then it just chain reaction of junk in space, which would absolutely be terrible. Let's be real. But China just has so many more military satellites than we do that like they can afford losing a couple. Like, they can afford that. That's fine for them. And if they remove our eyes in the sky, then they can mass up as many military forces on their border as they want, and then Taiwan wouldn't have that 60-day heads up that they're coming. They'd still have to go in April or October, but it wouldn't be so obvious.
Well, God help us, none of this stuff happens.
Yeah, seriously.
Because, I don't know, man. War with China would between the United States. If the U.S. was drawn into a war with China, I just want to give my final position. It would be terrible. Like, it would most likely mean a war that could very well result in in nuclear weapons being tossed back and forth, which
the extinction of mankind.
Which would be the extinction of mankind. And as crazy as the people who run these countries, and including our own country, and believe me, I think China is not good either. However, they may be kind of sadists, but I don't think they want to die.
They're not stupid. They're not
that dumb, because they actually have to live with or not live if DC's nuked. They actually have to deal with the consequences in that respect. You don't really have to deal with the consequences if you
there's no
drop
plan
some
B if you blow
bombs
up a
on
planet.
Gaddafi or something like that.
Yeah. Exactly.
You're just probably going to get a promotion for doing that. Yeah, well, that's my take. I'm. Do you have anything else to add before?
No, man, that's all the information I got. Hopefully you guys, learn something about not only the China and the Taiwan situation, but also about the some of the military tactic and strategies that surround this particular issue. And let us know what you think. Do you think China would pull it off? Do you think they'd try? Do you think the U.S. would step in and help them out? Like, let us know.
Yeah, one more thing I forgot to mention, and I saw an article in the National Interest that said that Taiwan should learn from the Six-Day War. So how Israel preemptively destroyed Egypt's air force. They're like, well, China could do the same thing to Taiwan, so they should be ready for it. So I thought it was interesting that there was an article in the National Interest about that, but maybe we can talk about that on another episode further, because I've been wanting to do an episode on the Six-Day War. But we got Six-Day War and then ultimately UFOs, so we got a lot of content that and some other episodes we've been discussing as well lined up. If you want to support the show, and thank you guys for listening to another episode. If you want to support the show, make sure that you rate and review our podcast on Apple. If you're listening, go to the 5-star thing and click 5 stars, rate and review, and then leave a review. Say, hey, I very much enjoyed your podcast today, and it made my hour and a half that much better. Thank you, good sir. That would be the type of review that we would prefer to see when that pops up. But if you want to say, hey, I hope you guys, don't make it back to your house tonight, then, I mean, whatever. It is what it is. Keep that to yourself. But yeah, rate and review the podcast. It is the number one way to help this show continue to grow. And then if you want to support us on Patreon, that's Bro History at Patreon. We have extra content on there, early episodes, as well as access to our Slack, which is a fun community that we set up. And that is all I have to say. It is 12:12 a.m. in the morning right now, and it's sweltering hot in this recording room. So I think I might be signing off.
Same.
All right. Thanks, guys, again for listening, and we will see you next week. Peace.